Welcome to Section 420, Talking Yankees. The offseason. As you know, the New York Yankees have a rich tradition and history, and my next guest, Brian, has a podcast dedicated towards that. It's called Historical Pinstripes, and he's here to join us now. Hi, Brian. Welcome to the show.
Hey, hi James, how are you? Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Now, people can follow you on Instagram at Historic Pinstripes, and your podcast, Historic Pinstripes, is available on Spotify, Podbean, as well as Google Podcasts, as well as on Apple Podcasts. So, people can check you out. What made you gravitate, again, with the Yankees, there's such a historic franchise. I mean, you could go in many different directions, but what made you focus on, the historic aspect of it?
I guess just because there's so much in Yankee history, and I think just because I kind of like being very creative, and like a lot of times I'm trying to get more consistent at it too, and do it every single week. I think mainly it's just there's so much to talk about, and and there's a lot of people that talk about it's good to I like talking about like obviously the all the Yankees are doing during the year and stuff, because that's always fun. But I think I just wanted it just to be a little bit different, because I don't want to do the same thing that other people are doing. So I just wanted to change it up a little bit and be a little more creative. Like I did the historic pinstripes challenges, which I'm going to bring back, like when I create the games and stuff, just because I kind of like trying to do my own Don Sterling voice. I think everyone kind of has their own Don Sterling voice that they do, like even if they don't do it with other people. But I don't know, it's just kind of fun to talk about. I've always enjoyed even. I mean, I live in Massachusetts too, so I mean, like I've always been like kind of the outsider because obviously the Red Sox fans are a lot more around here than Yankee fans, but there's still quite a few Yankee fans around here, believe it or not. I think you've had a couple of Rhode Island Yankee fans on your show, Andrew Rotondi and there's a couple other guys, but anyways, yeah. So I just really enjoy talking about the Yankees. Yeah.
And in terms of, like I said before, you lived in Massachusetts your whole life. So, I mean, how was it a family linkage? I mean, how'd you end up being a Yankee fan compared to your neighbors probably across the street that want to throw rocks at you maybe?
Yeah, but my dad was a big Yankee fan, and I never really. That's just kind of how I just gravitated towards because he rooted for the Yankees when I was a kid, and I just remember watching Yankee games a lot. Like it's because they used to have WPIX down here for a long time until they got rid of it, and they just have it in New York. Had it in New York eventually. So I remember watching like every Saturday. I'd watch Yankee games with my dad. Sometimes at night too, once in a while. But obviously, if it was a school night, maybe not always. But I grew up in like the late 80s, early 90s. I remember mostly with the Yankees, mostly the early 90s, which obviously they weren't very good. But I remember Don Mattingly, he was my favorite player, and Bernie Williams, got to see him kind of develop throughout his career. So I would say those two are my favorite players. But basically, just from watching TV with my dad and just enjoying playing baseball and watching baseball. My uncle also was a big baseball fan. I used to talk about baseball with him. But he was more of an Indians fan, though, which is kind of
Mhm.
different.
Obviously, you look at the historical Yankee perspective. Now you look at, obviously there's some stadiums still left from the old days, Wrigley Field, Fenway Park, and of course Yankee Stadium, of course, over 10 years ago, knocked down and put up the new stadium. I mean, just as a Yankee fan in general, would have you preferred to somehow they would have renovated and stay in the old stadium, or did you, fall in love and agree, say, hey, you know what, I like the new stadium? Like, what's your feelings on that?
At first, I kind of missed the old stadium, but after seeing the new stadium, I kind of like the new stadium as well because it's kind of, it does have a very nostalgic feel of the old stadium. It's definitely very different too because it's more spread out. In some ways, it's good, but the old stadium did have that kind of closeness, I guess. I don't know, it's hard to say. I mean, the first Yankee game I went to, I was 21, 22 years old. Obviously, I don't live in New York, so, but, but I don't know. I enjoyed both stadiums a lot. I think just going to see the Yankees play, and I think the fact that they made the stadium just so realistic to what it was back in the back like when Babe Ruth played in 1923. Uh, I feel like it's kind of an homage to the original Yankee Stadium. So that I kind of like. I appreciate how they kind of kept the stadium basically the same as it has been. It's kind of like the evolution of the entire Yankee Stadium. That's kind of an episode I want to do eventually. It's something about like Yankee Stadium, just how they changed it throughout the years. Because I think originally it was like 500 feet or so, 495 to left center field. That was Death Valley, but now it's not really Death Valley. It's just like I think it's 385 to left center or something like that.
Yeah, I remember like before they renovated, when Harmon Killebrew visited as a player, obviously he was a right-handed power hitter. He would hit some bombs out there, and like I said, they couldn't go out, and he almost like whispered to Mantle, like, how can you play in this place?
Yeah.
And I agree with you. No, I do like the new stadium. I gravitated toward it on day one. Just, it does have the look of the old stadium, plus just the convenience. You could get out in like less than 5 minutes, where the old stadium, especially if you were upper deck, like it took like half hour just to get out with those old ramps. But I do feel that the Yankees lost a little home field advantage, because it just seemed like maybe the structure, like you said, like the crowd was literally on top of the opposing players, and just the way the noise capacitated. I think there was more of an intimidation factor, which I don't think you have as much at the new stadium. But even though, I remember a couple of years ago, the Astro players actually complained a little bit that, they were getting that, that ruckus old feeling. But I think the Yankees lost a little home field edge, though, with the newest stadium, because just the way it's built, I just don't think you get that same intimidation with the noise and the crowds on top of you. But no, I'm very happy with the new stadium, and depending on whatever options, versus them moving to Manhattan or go to Jersey or somewhere else, it all worked out for the better.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think that's very true. Because even like I remember, I think it was the Twins. It might have been the Astros too. They were all like very. It was kind of like just how loud the fans got. It was definitely an intimidation factor. But even at the old stadium, again, I remember those 2003, 2004 ALCS the series against the Red Sox. Those both of them really, even though the Yankees lost in 04, but still, just how packed the crowd was and how into it they all were. I mean, obviously, Game 7, maybe not leave that one out, but Game 2003 especially, because that year was better for the Yankees, of course. So, but just the way like the crowd was, and everyone was always on top. It was really cool to see. I think I always wanted to see a playoff game at Yankee Stadium. It never really happened, but at the old Yankee Stadium, just because of how like it seemed like it was kind of like a Yankee community. I definitely agree with them.
Yeah, especially with the bleach creation and stuff. Yeah, they carried over, but yeah, back then, totally different atmosphere in the old stadium. I only got to see one world. I got to see '99 Game 4 of the World Series. That's the year they swept Atlanta.
Sure.
And the place went ruckus, of course, but I think because the Yankees were up 3-0 and it was kind of a foregone conclusion they were going to win that series. So, it wasn't as crazy as it probably was '96 Game 6. That was probably nuts. So, I mean, I could only imagine how that was. But at least I experienced it once in '99.
That's cool. That's really cool.
Now, with some of your past episodes, you do a breakdown of some of the best Yankee players at each position. Yeah. So I'm sure, you have your ideas in mind. I did a similar episode a couple of seasons ago, so I kind of have who I think is the best Yankee at position. So I figure let's go quickly around the horn. I'm going to throw out a position, and you give me who you think the best Yankee of all time was at that position. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right, so we're going to start behind the dish. Now, you got home plate. Obviously, there's a number of great Yankees. You had Bill Dickey, Yogi Berra, Thurman Munson. Even if you look at someone like Jorge Posada, which, you know what? Switch hitting catcher with power, number of Yankee championships. So who's your number one all-time Yankee catcher?
I still have to go with Yogi just because I feel like he gets the edge. I agree, though. Jorge Posada doesn't always get a lot of credit, but he came a long way. Like Yogi, I think Yogi, when he started, he wasn't a great defensive catcher. Posada was, of course, a second baseman, so he really came a long way, I think, defensively. But overall, it's hard to not go with someone like Yogi Berra, but it's kind of also hard to not – because they threw Munson, obviously, with the tragic accident. I feel like if that hadn't happened, I always kind of wondered how good he would have been. He probably would have been a Hall of Famer. So I think maybe he could have ended up being the best ever. Then again, Bill Dickey, he was a mentor to Yogi, and I think Elston Howard too, because I know he worked with Elston. But anyways, I feel like Yogi Berra is the number one for me.
No, I would agree with you. And we could almost throw in Elston Howard in there as well, because he has a couple MVPs. And you actually did an episode of Elston Howard, the first African-American Yankee. So yeah, his name could go in there as well. I really feel with Thurman though, it's like it just seemed like his numbers were declining a little bit. So even if the tragic accident didn't happen, I just don't think he would have the numbers to compare to the others. But Thurman was always known more for his defense, his grit, and just
Yeah,
his presence on the team, kind
leadership.
of, which was bigger actually than his stats. That was kind of his persona was more, what made Thurman Thurman. So we'll switch to first base. Now we got a couple there, but of course we'll whittle it down. I mean, obviously you have Lou Gehrig or Don Mattingly. What do you
Yeah.
think?
Well, Mattingly was my favorite player of all time, but I still I can't go I can't. Lou Gehrig's number one, I think, because he's just I think he's like the complete package as far as first baseman and really players go. I could make a case that he's probably the greatest Yankee player of all time. But as far as first baseman, I think it's Lou Gehrig by a long shot.
No,
Even though I
totally.
really like Don Mattingly, I feel like he could have been. It would have been interesting if he is back, um, uh, if he had stayed healthier. But I feel like it's still Lou Gehrig by a long shot.
No, I totally agree there. And Gehrig, I mean, not only that, just look at the batting average and not only home runs, but triples as well. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't see first baseman hit triples. So guy had a lot of speed. And unfortunately, with his disease, got caught short. Again, only fell short of 7 home runs from the magical 500. I mean,
That's
again, he's
right.
a Hall of Famer anyway, but it would be nice to also have 500 home runs. So, yeah, I only, as much as I love Don Manning as well, I grew up in the 80s. Yeah, it's no contest. So we'll go to second base. Again, it's kind of a weird position because Yankees never really had like a super duper star at second base. I mean, they've had a lot of good players. But I kind of always felt like, if you look back at the numbers, between the 40, 30s and 40s, I always went with Joe Gordon as the best Yankees second baseman. But again, you can make a case for others. You can make a case for Robinson Cano, for his time as a Yankee. What do you think?
I agree with both of those. I was surprised by. I didn't realize how good Joe Gordon was. He's kind of another guy. He's not really talked about as much. I think he played second base and third base too, but he was a good player, another right-handed hitter. So he kind of probably lost quite a few home runs, I'm sure, playing in the old Yankee Stadium. But I always kind of went back to Tony Lazzeri because I feel like even though I think it took him a long time to make the Hall of Fame, but he eventually made it. But he kind of got overshadowed by Babe Ruth, kind of I guess like Joe Gordon got overshadowed by DiMaggio, probably even Gehrig because I think he started with him. But I always tend to lean toward Tony Lazzeri, but I feel like between Gordon, I was very impressed when I did that episode because I didn't realize how good Joe Gordon was. I think I put him at number 3 or so, or number 2. I can't remember, but even Cano too. Like I feel like if it's too bad Cano, the Yankees didn't sign Cano because like if they had, I mean, then they probably wouldn't have signed Ellsbury, and of course that was one of their worst signings ever. But if they had, I feel like Cano would have been definitely the best Yankee second baseman ever. But I feel like I still have to stay with either Tony Lazzeri or Joe Gordon. It's kind of a toss up between those two.
No, you can't go wrong with either one. When I did something that I was kind of caught in between, it's like it's almost a coin flip. But I went with Gordo because also he lost a little time because I think he served in World War II. So you figure if he had those years that he wasn't serving, if he could have played, it would have added to his stats.
Yeah.
But yeah, you could go with either one. So now we switch to shortstop, which again is probably a no-brainer. But we'll just whittle it down to Jeter and Phil Rizzuto.
Yeah, that's my I of course Derek Jeter's number one for me, but Phil Rizzuto was a very good defensive shortstop, and I think at the time too they didn't really shortstops didn't hit much usually. I think it was the MVP one year, but typically they just kind of hit for an average sometimes, but their job was basically just to get on base and just to play really good defense and run, I guess. But I would say definitely Jeter. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you got to say Rizzuto was a man of his time because again, shortstops were only expected to like move the runner over, bunt, and play good defense, and Rizzuto did that to a T. So in his time, he was the man. It's just Derek Jeter's Derek Jeter. He's the captain, the whole 3,000 hits. So yeah, that
Yeah.
man's Jeter. Now you go to third base, which is kind of weird. Again, I went with A-Rod just because, again, technically he's a shortstop. But again, he played all his years as a Yankees a third baseman. But for all his faults, I mean, you got a guy, over 500 home runs. And perhaps, again, we don't know all the PEDs, but one of the greatest baseball players flat out of all time. So, again, I had to give my nod to A-Rod at third base.
Yeah. I almost gave it to A-Rod. I ended up giving it to Greg Nettles because how great he was at defensively at third base, but it's it. I could still go back and forth because I feel like, but I feel like the more I think about it, I feel like A-Rod probably is the better player overall. I mean, PEDs aside, you give credit due. I mean, he was one of the greats, like because he did so much offensively and defensively, and he became a really good third baseman too.
Yeah, couple Gold Gloves, couple of MVPs, you know, '05 and '07. So, but I think a lot of Yankee fans would probably agree with you more because they always feel like A-Rod's not a real Yankee, so they would
Yeah,
probably go with Nettles over
yeah,
A-Rod. So we're switching the outfield again. We're doing no DHs here. So we're going to go to the pre-73 rule. So you got right field, a couple of, you know, a player called Babe Ruth we may know about. We'll throw in Reggie Jackson, and what the hell, let's put in Paul O'Neill there. But obviously right field, almost like shortstop, probably a no-brainer. But what do you think?
I agree. I think Babe Ruth. You kind of got to go with Babe Ruth there because I feel like he's like kind of like grandfathered in as number one because he's like the first big superstar in baseball, not only with the Yankees. But if I had to go with somebody else, I'd probably number two, probably Roger Maris because he doesn't really get it. He kind of gets overshadowed a lot, but Roger Maris when he was with the Yankees, I think every year he had a really good year. It seemed like. And after him, I'd say Paul O'Neill because Paul O'Neill, just the way the intensity he played with, the leadership. I think his leadership was probably his most important attribute with the Yankees in the late '90s, and he was just clutch. But number one is Babe Ruth, and then I'd say probably Barris.
Yeah, it has to
Reggie
be.
Jackson. Yeah, Jackson too. I forgot.
Yeah, but yeah, Ruth like this because I mean he's like the godfather, like you said, the godfather of the Yankees, so he's got to be
Yeah.
it. So now we go to center field. Kind of, this is gonna be an interesting one. Now you got Joe DiMaggio, all his suaveness and all his mystique and all that, versus Mickey Mantle, who again, even though Mantle put up some tremendous numbers, we never really got to see the real Mickey Mantle because obviously he tore his knee early, and even though he had a fantastic Hall of Fame career, we never got to see what he truly could have been. But what do you think between Jolton, Joel, and the Mick?
I it's hard not to go with Mantle because he was so great, and like you said, he never got to see what he could have been because of his injuries and the alcohol problems that he had. But Joe D, like he missed 3 years right in the middle of his career with World War II, and the fact that I think he had like 47 home runs one year or something like that, and he was a right-handed hitter, probably the greatest right-handed hitter in Yankee history, I would say. But I think I, I can go back and forth again. I think if I had to give an edge, I'd give it slightly to Joe DiMaggio, but it depends on the day sometimes. But I feel like Joe DiMaggio is just maybe a little bit more consistent. But I think if Mickey was healthy, he would have been the best ever.
Yeah, I
So,
totally agree. My end, I gave it to the Mick. I meant just more because the switch hitting aspect of it, switch hitting with power.
sure.
And in terms of the speed, again, before the injuries, I mean, he was lightning quick. So he wasn't only a power hitter, but he could beat out a dribbler back to the pitching mound, and he could usually beat it out before the injuries took place. So sort of a total package of an athlete. Had to go with Mantle. So lastly, but not least, we got left field where it's weird. Like the Yankees never had like one steady, like monumental position player out in left field. It's always been a mix of platoon players and a player that was there for a couple of years. You got a number thrown in there. I know you went through a bunch. Who's your number one Yankee left fielder of all time?
Well, there's quite a few of them. There's not really. That's the one spot that was a little bit harder for me to pick. But I had to pick one. The one that sticks out right now, I can't even remember who I picked at the time. But I think Roy White would probably. He's a guy that I would probably. I'd probably go with because he was a good switch hitter. He played his whole career with the Yankees, and he didn't really like. He was just he's kind of under the radar. So I feel like he was really good.
No, totally. Yeah, can't go wrong there. Again, 'cause they never had one stable. When I looked at the stats and then I realized, hey, look, during the '80s, hey, Dave Winfield was there for almost like 10 years. But it's like you don't think about him because, like, again, he was during the period where the Yankees weren't that good, and there was also he missed a couple years with injury, and Steinbrenner was always going at his throat. But it's a Hall of Fame play. The years he was in there with Mattingly, again, came in second of the MVP. So I meant not wrong with Roy White. You go good with there, but I just went with Winfield just because it's an overwhelming power hitter, right-handed power hitter who ended up in the Hall of Fame with over 3,000 hits.
Yeah.
So I went with Winfield on that one, even though, again, you don't never really think of him as a Yankee, similar to A-Rod, but hey, look, he was there for almost a decade.
Yeah. Yeah, he was, and I didn't realize how how much George Steinbrenner he really gave him a hard time Winfield too, and I think but maybe that's part of it too because he was there was so much going on with Winfield when he was with the Yankees, and obviously again like you said they weren't very good, but yeah he I mean although I think in '85 they were like a couple games back in the division and they just missed it, and the Royals ended up winning it of course, but that was one year. I guess it could have changed things if they had maybe a little bit better pitching. I think the pitching was as good in the '80s, I believe. But
Yeah, but they
yeah,
did have a couple of seasons where they won 90 plus games, where this day and age, you'd be a wild card team and make the playoff. Back then, again, you only had AL East and AL West, and that's it. So there were a lot of teams that won 93, 95 games, but, just they didn't get in because it wasn't good enough. It was tougher to get in. And again, it put more of an emphasis on the regular season, which now you could be maybe a 500 team or below 500 and get in the playoffs, just to show you the difference of the times.
Yeah, and it makes a difference too. Like with that wild card makes a big difference too. There's a lot of teams, even in the past, I'm sure that could have. I think in 1954, the Indians won like 110 games, and then like the Yankees, I think they won 103, 104. Because I remember I was looking it up a little while ago, and the Yankees were in second place, but they won over like 100 games. It was like 102 or something. But the Indians had a really good year that year. But yeah, the wild card makes a big difference.
All right, so we'll just leave one pitching question. We'll just leave it to the starter. And again, just starters. Ron Guidry or Whitey Ford?
I give the slight edge to Whitey Ford just because I feel like for his day, I guess he was a strikeout pitcher for his day, but he was definitely more of a crafty type of finesse guy. And they didn't really, like he always wanted the ball. And I guess Casey Stengel, like he would like, from what I've heard from my dad and my uncle, they used to talk baseball all the time. And I remember them saying how like, I guess Casey Stengel used to save Whitey for just most important games like the Red Sox series or a postseason game or whatever it was. But like, and I think eventually I ended up researching that. I guess in 1960 he wanted to pitch 3 games. I think it was in the World Series, and he ended up pitching only 2. And he was kind of upset about that. And when Ralph Hook came, he made sure he got him every 4 days consistently, and he had his best year, of course, in '61. So I get the slight edge to him. But Ron Guidry, though, is another kind of he came up. It took him a while to get going, but he was a Hall of Fame caliber pitcher. I think maybe if he had started younger, maybe he would have been a Hall of Famer. So it's close, but I think Ford. But
yeah, it's close. I just think also, I mean, Ford played a different era. I think maybe, I just think again, I said, I don't think he threw particularly hard. Again, we don't really know what the radar gun stuff was back then. I think maybe Gator had better stuff, but of course, we look at Ford's numbers, you can understand why you go in that direction. And quick little note on that 1960 series, what happened with that? Yeah, exactly. Ford wanted to start the 3 games. Casey Stengel went with someone else in Game 7. The Yankees lost, of course, as you know, and that's what got Casey Stengel fired.
That's right.
And it was weird because the Yankees, if you compare the series, the Yankees offensively blew out the Pirates, but in the individual games that the Pirates won, they won. And of course, Game 7, they didn't go with Ford. The Yankees lose, of course, Maravsky with the game-winning home run, and because as we all know, left Mickey Mantles in tears supposedly. So really quickly, got only a couple of minutes left. So we mentioned a couple of marquee Yankees. Again, at their position, of course, the godfather is Babe Ruth. And then we have someone, Mariano Rivera, who perhaps the greatest closer of all time, a lifelong Yankee, was the best at whatever he did. So who would you say is the more talented Yankee? And I know you had this kind of poll going on one of your shows, Mariano Rivera or Babe Ruth?
Mariano, Babe Ruth. Ooh. It's a tough one. I feel like it's hard not to go with Babe Ruth still, but Mariano, I think it was kind of like a gift from, like he always says the cutter was a gift from God, but in a way he was kind of a gift from God to the Yankees in a way. It's a tough one. I feel like I kind of got to give a slight edge to Babe Ruth just because he did so much for baseball and really the Yankees, because the Yankees before 1923 they won no World Series. So I'm just going to give a slight edge to Babe Ruth, but it's very close. It's back and forth, I think.
All right, and last question again, because we mentioned Bernie Williams at the top of the episode. So, in terms of longevity as a Yankee versus maybe a little flash and pizzazz, who do you consider to be more a Yankee, Bernie Williams or Reggie Jackson?
Ooh, that's a good question. I, I'm a pretty big Bernie Williams fan, so I side a little bit with Bernie on that one. But at the same time, though, Reggie Jackson, I think George Steinbrenner I heard kind of said I think he said he had regretted not bringing him back toward the end of his career. So I feel like Reggie's definitely a Yankee, there's no question about it. And you know, one of the most clutch hitters of all time. I think him and Derek Jeter, and even Bernie Williams actually, because Bernie Williams was a really clutch player in the postseason. That's close. I feel like it's a tie. Really, they're both really big Yankees, and like even like Reggie is still around with the Yankees and still helping out. I think Brian Cashman, I think he's still a special advisor or something like that. But I would side a little bit more with Bernie, but I mean, it can't go wrong with either one.
I totally agree. And funny, when Reggie came back in '82 as an Angel, the first game at Yankee Stadium, ends up hitting a 3-run home run off of Rod Guidry. And again, that's when Steinbrenner realized, oh, why did I let this guy go? So
Okay.
before we wrap it up, I mean, in terms of, the episodes you've done previously and stuff you worked on, what's like the most interesting stat or fact you've, uncovered, doing your research that this blew your mind that you never knew before?
Um, there's quite a few of them actually. There's like like I said, Joe Gordon. I didn't realize how good he even was, let alone a Hall of Famer. um, there's a lot of things. Uh, I think I just enjoy looking at all the numbers too and stuff. There's another guy, a guy named Spud Chandler. I think he had some really good years in the 30s. There was one year though he had like a year it was like 1.7 something ERA, um, and that's probably one of the biggest stats I can think of off the top of my head. Um, there's a lot of them though. It's hard to pinpoint on one of them, but that's one of them for sure. I think Spud Chandler.
We'll go with Spud Chandler as the winner. So Spud Chandler wins the most interesting factoid contest. So Brian, pleasure to have you again. People can follow you on Instagram at Historic Pinstripes, and of course the Historic Pinstripes podcast on Podbean, Apple, Google Podcasts, and again they can follow you also on Twitter. So again, pleasure to join you. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep digging up that Yankee history because, of course, it is important for a lot of newer fans who maybe don't understand about Spud Chandler or Joe Gordon. So thanks very much for your work, Brian.
Thank you too.